Hey everyone. So these LA elections got me thinking
Yeah.
about all this tough on crime talk that's been going around.
hmm
And it got me wondering, like, what do we even consider crime these days?
That's such a good question.
Feels like there's so much we don't even talk about.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole other world of offenses that we don't really pay attention to.
Exactly.
And today, we're diving into one of those, wage theft,
Ooh.
using the experiences of Dr. Jaime Hoerricks,
Oh, right, Dr. Hoerricks.
who actually worked for the city of LA
Wow.
and uncovered something pretty shocking.
Yeah, their story is incredible. It really makes you think,
He does.
like, wait, whose side is the system really on?
Yeah.
So for our listener, just imagine working for years. You're putting in your time, and then suddenly you find out you haven't been paid what you were owed,
Right.
like systematically underpaid.
Hmm.
And that's exactly what happened to Horrocks and 7 of their colleagues
Wow.
at the city of LA.
At the city of LA.
Yes. They were supposed to get this thing called standby compensation,
Okay.
which basically means they were on call, ready to work, even when they weren't actually on duty.
Got it.
And here's where it gets crazy.
Okay.
The city admitted they made a mistake.
What?
They knew they messed up
Oh, wow.
and weren't paying these employees properly.
So they admitted it, and then what happened?
Well, that's the thing.
Okay.
They didn't actually fix it.
They didn't?
Nope. Even though they acknowledged the mistake, they just refused to rectify it.
Oh, my God.
And we're not talking about like a small oversight here.
Right.
Over 15 years, the estimated total loss for these 8 employees was over $16 million.
Seriously.
Seriously. And then adjust that for inflation.
Okay.
It's closer to $21 million.
$21 million.
I know. It's crazy to think that a city could just admit to underpaying its employees
Right.
by that much and face absolutely no consequences.
It's wild.
I mean, can you imagine if someone walked into a store and just took $21 million from the register?
Oh, my God.
They'd be in huge trouble.
Absolutely.
But when it's an institution, it's like a whole different story.
It's like a completely different set of rules.
Exactly. And that's what's so jarring about this whole thing.
Right?
Society is so quick to condemn the individual who maybe steals a small amount out of desperation.
Yeah.
But then these big institutions can essentially steal millions from workers.
Yeah.
And it's barely even a whisper.
It's barely a blip on the radar.
So I'm curious, what was Herrick's experience trying to actually address this?
Oh, yeah.
I know they mentioned facing some difficulties initially because of their autism. Right?
Yeah. So initially, Hoerricks struggled to get the help they needed.
Okay.
They faced some communication barriers because of their autism.
Right.
And it took a while to find someone who could really understand their situation and advocate for them.
I see.
And it just goes to show how difficult it can be to navigate these systems.
Yeah.
Especially for people who face those kinds of extra challenges.
Absolutely.
Right.
And going up against the city attorney's office,
Yeah.
trying to get justice for themselves and their colleagues.
Wow.
It must have felt like David versus Goliath.
Oh, totally.
And this really highlights that power imbalance that's at the core of this whole issue.
Yes, absolutely.
You have individuals often in already vulnerable positions who are trying to get what they're owed
Right.
from these powerful institutions
Yeah.
that have all the resources and legal muscle on their side.
Exactly.
It's basically a recipe for exploitation.
It really is.
So how does something like this even happen in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about $21 million just disappearing.
It's a lot of money.
There had to be systems in place to prevent this kind of thing.
Well, on paper, yes.
Okay.
There are laws against wage theft.
Okay.
But actually enforcing those laws,
Yeah.
that's a whole other story.
Right.
And that's where we get into the nuances of the legal system and really like the priorities of our society as a whole.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
Why is it so hard to actually crack down on wage theft?
Right.
I mean, if the city admitted they made a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't it be like open and shut?
You would think. Yeah. But it's not that simple.
Okay.
So legally wage theft often falls under the category of a civil matter rather than a criminal one,
Oh, I see.
which means the burden of proof is on the worker.
Okay.
They have to prove that they were wronged.
Got it.
And the consequences for the employer are usually just fines or back payments
Okay.
rather than like jail time.
So it's more of a slap on the wrist than actual accountability.
Pretty much.
It seems like the consequences for stealing $100 from a cash register are way more severe
Right.
than stealing millions through wage theft.
It's a huge disparity.
Yeah. And then this all ties into this broader question
Yeah.
about how our economic system prioritizes certain types of property
Yes.
and the institutions that uphold it, like stealing a physical object that's seen as a direct threat to the order of things. But wage theft, while it is stealing, it's stealing people's time and labor.
Yes.
It's often hidden within this complicated web of employer-employee relationships.
Exactly.
So it's almost like the system itself is designed to protect the people in power and make it really difficult for everyday people to get justice when they've been wronged.
That's a good way to put it.
And it's not even just about the money.
No.
There's a human cost to this kind of exploitation.
Absolutely.
Imagine working hard, contributing to your community, and constantly being shortchanged.
Right.
It's incredibly demoralizing.
Well, sure.
It can lead to financial instability, stress, and even health problems.
Absolutely.
This isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
We're talking about people's lives.
Exactly.
You know, hearing all of this, it makes me think about all this tough on crime talk.
Yeah.
And how misleading it can actually be.
It is misleading.
I mean, are we really tough on crime if we're turning a blind eye to this massive problem of wage theft?
It makes you wonder.
It seems like the focus is always on punishing individuals
Right.
and not on holding the institutions accountable.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
How do we even start to tackle a problem that seems so embedded in our economic system?
That's the big question.
And I know Hoerricks has some pretty strong opinions about this.
They do.
So why don't we dive into those in part 2?
Sounds good.
We can explore some of their proposed solutions
Okay.
and see if our current political climate is even ready to address this issue in a meaningful way.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, stay tuned, folks,
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
because this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, see you in part 2.
See you there. So before the break, we were talking about how wage theft kind of gets swept under the rug.
Yeah.
Like it's not treated as seriously as other kinds of theft.
Right. It's almost like there's this hierarchy of crime.
Yeah.
Where the higher up you go, the less criminal it seems to be.
Oh, yeah.
But Hoerricks argues that we need to fundamentally change how we think about this.
They do.
So what are some of the specific things they recommend?
Well, Hoerricks is a really big proponent of actually criminalizing wage theft.
Okay.
They believe that making it a felony
Oh,
with penalties that are similar to other forms of theft,
okay.
that would send a really strong message.
So actually hitting them where it hurts,
Yeah,
the bottom line.
exactly, making the punishment fit the crime.
I like that.
But Hoerricks actually goes even further than that.
Okay.
They suggest that we hold executives and public officials personally accountable.
Ooh, now that's interesting.
So if a CEO knows that their company is engaging in wage theft
Right.
and they don't do anything to stop it,
Yeah.
they should face consequences.
That's a bold move.
It is.
Holding the people at the top responsible?
Yeah,
But wouldn't that be hard to prove?
it would be.
How do you actually show that a CEO was directly involved in something like that?
Well, that's where stronger whistleblower protections come in.
Okay.
Hoerricks argues that we need to create a system where employees can safely report wage theft without being afraid of retaliation.
Right, because right now,
Exactly.
a lot of workers are probably afraid to speak up,
Especially.
especially if they're undocumented or in a really precarious work situation.
Absolutely.
So the problem is probably even bigger than we realize.
It's definitely bigger than we realize.
If people are afraid to even report it, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
Ugh.
Workers are afraid to report, so companies get away with it.
Right.
And then the cycle just continues.
And Hoerricks also advocates for more resources for labor organizations, right?
They do.
Like stronger unions.
Yeah.
That can help workers negotiate better wages and working conditions. So they're less susceptible to this kind of exploitation in the first place.
Exactly. Prevention is key.
But don't some people say that unions are kind of outdated?
Yeah.
That they hinder economic growth?
Yeah, that's a pretty common argument. But Hoerricks actually points to a lot of research that debunks that myth.
Okay.
Studies have shown that strong unions can actually lead to increased productivity and a more stable economy overall.
So it's a win-win situation.
Potentially, yes.
Better for the workers and better for the economy as a whole.
Exactly. But it requires a shift in mindset.
Yeah.
We have to stop seeing workers as just expendable cogs in a machine
Right.
and start actually valuing their contributions.
That's a good point.
And Hoerricks even draws a parallel to California's prison labor system,
Oh, wow.
where incarcerated individuals are often paid extremely low wages
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
for their work, particularly in firefighting.
Right. That's a whole other issue.
It is.
But how does that connect back to wage theft?
Well, Herrick sees it as kind of a continuation of the same exploitative system.
Okay.
So you have people who are being punished,
Right.
often for relatively minor offenses.
Yeah. And then they're forced to work for pennies,
Right.
while corporations are getting away with stealing millions.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. It's a system that seems designed to benefit the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable.
And that brings us back to the LA elections.
Yeah.
And all this tough on crime rhetoric.
Right.
Is this approach really about reducing crime?
That's the question.
Or is it about something else entirely?
It makes you wonder what the real agenda is.
Like, are we actually committed to addressing the root causes of crime?
Right.
Which often include things like poverty and inequality and lack of opportunity.
All those systemic factors.
Or are we just focused on punishing individuals without really addressing the systems that create those problems in the first place?
It often feels like that's the case.
It's starting to feel like this tough on crime approach is more about creating this illusion of safety than actually dealing with the complex realities of crime and exploitation.
So what can our listener do?
Well, that's a good question.
This feels like such a huge problem.
It is a huge problem.
Where do we even begin to make a difference?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Okay.
The more people understand how widespread wage theft really is,
the
more likely we are to actually see some real change.
So it starts with education.
It does.
Okay, and then what?
Well, you can support organizations that are fighting for workers' rights. There are groups all over the country doing amazing work to educate, advocate, and hold employers accountable.
So get involved.
Get involved.
Okay.
And then on a more personal level, pay attention to where you spend your money.
Oh, that's a good point.
Support businesses that treat their employees fairly.
Right. Vote with your wallet.
Exactly.
What else?
Talk to your friends and family about these issues. The more we raise awareness, the harder it's going to be to ignore this problem.
It's like that saying, every vote counts. Like, every dollar we spend, every conversation we have can be like a little act of resistance against these systems of exploitation.
It all adds up.
Right. We don't have to just accept this as the way things are.
Absolutely not.
We can actually make a difference.
We can.
And don't underestimate the power of contacting your elected officials.
Oh, that's a good one.
Let them know that you care about this issue.
Right.
That you want to see stronger labor laws and better protections for workers.
Exactly. Make your voice heard.
So it's about individual action.
Yeah.
But it's also about collective action.
Absolutely.
It's about all of us working together to demand better and to create a system that truly values every worker.
That's cool.
You know, it's funny how this conversation started with the LA elections.
Yeah.
But it's really expanded into something so much bigger.
It has.
We're talking about a fundamental shift in how we view work and justice and the role of institutions in our society.
Big questions.
Big questions. So as we head into our final part,
I
want to hear a little bit more about Hoerricks' own personal journey in trying to seek justice.
Of course.
What were some of the challenges they faced?
Yeah.
And what lessons can we learn from their experience?
That's a great question. And in the next part, we're going to hear directly from Hoerricks about their experience navigating the legal system, the emotional toll this whole thing took on them, and their hopes for a future where wage theft is no longer tolerated.
All right, stay tuned, folks.
Yeah, because we're about to get personal.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how personal this issue of wage theft can be.
Yeah.
It's not just numbers.
You're right.
It's people's lives, their livelihoods, their dignity.
Their whole world.
Exactly. And I know our listener is eager to hear more about Dr. Jaime Hoerricks' experience navigating this whole thing.
So what really stood out to me about Hoerricks' story was their determination. In the face of this really daunting challenge.
I mean, just imagine going up against this massive institution like the city of LA.
I know.
Knowing that they'd wronged you and your colleagues and still being met with all this resistance and bureaucratic roadblocks.
It's unbelievable.
It really is like a David and Goliath story.
It is.
And you mentioned earlier that Hoerricks faced some additional hurdles because of their autism.
They did.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Hoerricks talks very openly about the challenges of navigating these systems with autism. They faced communication barriers. They struggled with the formal language and all the procedures. And it was really difficult for them to advocate for themselves in a way that felt comfortable and authentic.
It makes you realize how much these systems are really designed for a specific type of person.
Oh, totally.
A certain way of communicating.
Yeah.
And how they can exclude people who don't fit that mold.
It's a real problem.
Yeah, it is a huge problem.
Yeah.
And it's something that Hoerricks' experience really brings to light.
It does.
So knowing all of these obstacles that they were facing,
right?
What do you think kept them going?
That's a great question.
What motivated them to keep fighting?
Well, for Hoerricks, it was about more than just getting back the money they were owed.
Okay.
It was about principle, standing up for what's right.
Yeah.
Not just for themselves, but for their colleagues who were also affected.
It's that sense of solidarity.
Yeah.
Like injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
That's a great way to put it.
And Hoerricks saw this as a systemic issue, not just an isolated incident.
Right.
They wanted to expose the flaws in the system, hold those in power accountable, and prevent this from happening to other people.
That takes a lot of courage to speak truth to power.
It's not easy.
Especially when you're already facing an uphill battle.
And it
sounds like it wasn't easy. It wasn't.
Hoerricks has talked about the emotional toll this whole fight took on them.
Oh, yeah.
The stress, the frustration, the feeling of being ignored.
It can be really demoralizing.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So what would you say is like the biggest takeaway from Hoerricks' story?
That's a good question.
What can our listeners learn from their experience?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of perseverance.
Right.
Like not giving up even when the odds are stacked against you.
Right.
Hoerricks' story shows that it's possible to challenge powerful institutions, to expose wrongdoing, and to fight for justice, even when it feels impossible.
It's inspiring.
It is.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in holding those in power accountable.
Absolutely.
And creating a more just and equitable world.
That's what it's all about.
And it's also a reminder that change doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't.
It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes effort. And it takes courage.
And courage.
To speak up and to challenge the status quo.
To stand up for what's right.
But as Hoerricks' story shows, it's a fight worth having.
It is.
You know, we started this deep dive talking about the LA elections and all this tough on crime rhetoric.
Yeah.
But through Hoerricks' story, we've uncovered so much more.
We have.
We've seen how the very definition of crime can be manipulated to protect the powerful and punish the vulnerable.
It's a real problem.
We've explored this complex issue of wage theft.
Yeah.
A crime that often goes unseen and unpunished, but has such devastating consequences for millions of workers.
It's heartbreaking.
And we've witnessed the courage of one individual who dared to challenge the system and fight for justice.
Yeah.
It's been a really powerful journey.
It has.
And I hope our listener is walking away from this deep dive.
I hope so too.
With a new sense of awareness.
Yeah.
Deeper understanding of what's really going on. And a commitment to being part of the solution.
We need all hands on deck.
Because creating a more just and equitable society requires all of us to be engaged, to be informed, and to be willing to challenge the systems that perpetuate these inequalities.
And it's an ongoing fight.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. What other hidden injustices exist in our society?
That's the question.
What systems are operating in the shadows, benefiting the few at the expense of the many?
Right.
And what can we do, individually and collectively, to bring these issues to light? And demand a better world for everyone.
It's up to all of us.
Keep asking those questions.
Keep learning.
Keep exploring.
Yeah.
Keep pushing for change.
Don't give up.
Because the pursuit of justice is an ongoing journey.
It is.
And it's a journey that we must all take together.
Absolutely.
That's it for our deep dive today.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.